Every day, millions of people suffer from chronic lower back pain, aching knees, and relentless sinus infections that make daily life miserable. We desperately seek solutions by spending countless hours and money on doctors, complex diets, and vitamin supplements to fix our failing bodies. But what if the root cause isn't your lifestyle, but the incredibly clumsy and flawed evolutionary design of the human species itself? Listen to this eye-opening journey into the bizarre glitches of our anatomy, from pointless bones to broken genes, to finally understand why we are so beautifully imperfect. Let's find out more on Human Errors Summary by Nathan H. Lents.
Yeah, it really is. It's quite a shock to the system, isn't it? Because, we spend our whole lives hearing this completely different narrative about the human body.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, think about virtually every biology class you've ever sat through. The whole framing is always, behold the masterpiece of nature. We are constantly told the body is this finely tuned machine, like a Swiss watch or a high-end sports car, where every single microscopic part has a specific perfected function. You hear phrases like endless forms most beautiful, and you just naturally assume that we, as humans, are the absolute pinnacle of biological engineering.
Precisely. And what Nathan Lents is doing here in his deep dive into our anatomy, what he's doing is essentially taking that delicate Swiss watch, smashing it open with a hammer, and showing you that the gears inside are actually held together with duct tape, some rust, and a few bent paper clips.
That is such a vivid image. So we definitely aren't the sports car in this scenario.
We are definitely not the sports car. I mean, we are much more like a beat-up old sedan that's been kept running for 4 billion years by a mechanic who, crucially, isn't allowed to ever turn the engine off to fix anything. Lents argues that we are fundamentally a kludge.
A kludge? I actually haven't heard that word in a while.
Yeah, it's an old engineering term. I think it originally comes from computer science or early mechanical engineering. A kludge is a solution to a problem that is clumsy, inelegant, wildly inefficient, and really difficult to maintain, but, and this is the absolute key point here, it works. Barely. It's a quick fix, cobbled together without any sort of long-term planning.
Okay, so the core premise of this deep dive we're doing today is that evolution isn't the master architect we always assume it is.
Exactly. And that is the absolute core concept you have to grasp as we go through these sources. Evolution is not an engineer. An engineer, right, they sit down with a blank piece of paper or a blank blueprint. They look at a problem, say, okay, I need a creature that walks upright on 2 legs and breathes air. And they design the absolute perfect system for that specific goal completely from scratch.
Right, they optimize it.
Yes, but evolution cannot do that. Evolution is a hacker.
A hacker. I really like that distinction.
Yeah, it's a hacker that breaks into the existing messy code and just tries to patch it so the system doesn't crash. It works exclusively with what it already has on hand. It can't just go back to the drawing board. It has to take a fish, turn it into an amphibian, turn that into a mammal, and eventually turn that into a human, all while the creature is actively living, breathing, and reproducing. It's basically like trying to renovate a commercial jet airplane into a nuclear submarine while you are mid-flight over the Atlantic.
Which perfectly explains why things inside us are so unbelievably messy. If you can't land the plane to rewire it, you just have to shove the new cables wherever they happen to fit at the time.
Exactly. And because of this incredibly chaotic process, we end up with what Lents calls our human errors. And to help us sort through this, the sources categorize these biological blunders into 3 distinct buckets because, there are different historical reasons for our various flaws.
Okay, right. Let's quickly break those 3 buckets down for everyone before we get into the really gory anatomical details. What is the first bucket?
So the first category is wrong environment. These are traits and physical quirks that were actually perfect for us, or at least, highly advantageous, when we were living as hunter-gatherers on the African savannas during the Pleistocene era. But today, in a modern, air-conditioned, mostly sedentary, fast food-filled world, they are actively destroying our health.
Got it. So that's basically it's not you, it's the historical timeline excuse. Our biology is just out of date.
Yeah, I like that. What's the second bucket?
The second is incomplete adaptation. And this is where things get really physical, really structural. We are, quite literally, a species in transition. We just haven't finished evolving for our current physical lifestyle.
Like walking on 2 legs.
Yes, bipedalism is the classic example. We took a skeletal body plan that was clearly designed to walk horizontally on 4 legs, and we just sort of forced it to stand up vertically on 2. We are mostly there, functionally, but anatomically, we are essentially an active construction site that hasn't been cleaned up yet. That is the exact reason why practically everyone gets bad knees and aching lower backs as they age. Honestly, that makes me feel a little bit better about my own knee pain. It's not just me getting old and out of shape. It's my evolutionary ancestors just clocking out before finishing the job.
That's a great way to look at it.
And the third category.
The third one is perhaps the most frustrating: limits of evolution. This is the classic, you just can't get there from here engineering problem. Evolution can only make tiny, random, incremental tweaks over generations. It absolutely cannot rip out an entire flawed system and replace it with a better one. So sometimes we're just stuck with a biological design that is fundamentally objectively stupid. But because evolution can't hit the reset button, we just have to live with the glitch.
Well, speaking of fundamentally stupid designs, let's just dive right into the first major topic here.
Yeah.
Anatomical absurdities. And I want to start with the eye, because this really blew my mind reading through the material. I have always heard the eye used as the ultimate trump card for intelligent design, because it's just so incredibly complex.
It is incredibly complex, absolutely. No one denies that. But intelligent. That is a massive stretch. I mean, if you were hired by Nikon or Apple to design the camera for a new smartphone, and you submitted the schematic for the human eye, you would be fired before lunch on your first day.
Really? I mean, I'm looking across the room at you right now, and the picture is pretty sharp. It seems to work well.
Right. The final picture in your mind is clear, but that is entirely because your brain is doing a massive, exhausting amount of post-production software work to fix the terrible raw feed it's receiving. But the physical hardware of the eye itself, it's installed completely backward.
Wait, what do you mean backward? Like literally?
I mean literally, physically backward.
Yeah.
If you look at the vertebrate retina, so that's the biological film at the very back of the inside of your eye where the image is actually captured, the photoreceptors, those little rods and cones that actually catch the light particles, they are pointing away from the pupil. They are facing the dark back wall of your eyeball.
That seems, I mean, just logically completely counterintuitive.
It's totally absurd. Think of a photoreceptor like a microphone. You are supposed to speak into the front of a microphone, right? In the human eye, the microphone is turned around facing the brick wall, and the wire, the cable that carries the electrical signal from the sensor to the brain, is coming out of the front, facing out toward the incoming light.
Oh, wow. So the light entering your eye has to physically pass through all the wiring just to get to the sensor at the back.
Exactly. The light enters your pupil, and before it can even hit the photoreceptors to create an image, it has to pass through this dense, messy forest of blood vessels, nerve fibers, and supportive tissue. All of that biological clutter scatters the light. It blurs the incoming image. It actively degrades the quality of the visual data before it's even recorded.
So we basically have this super high-definition brain that is forced to constantly interpret a low-definition, noisy, scattered signal.
Precisely. It takes immense processing power to clean it up. And it gets even worse. Because all those nerve wires are sitting on the front or inside of the retina, they have to eventually go somewhere to get into the brain, right? They can't just dangle there in the eyeball fluid. So they all bundle together into one thick cable, and they have to physically punch a giant hole right through the retina to exit the back of the eye.
Oh, and that hole
is the optic disc, which creates your blind spot. Every single human being listening to this right now has a sizable, permanent hole in their vision in each eye where there are absolutely zero light sensors. It's a complete dead zone.
Yeah, I remember doing that little optical illusion test in middle school science class where you close one eye and slowly move a piece of paper closer to your face until the black dot just vanishes. It's actually kind of unnerving when you realize just how big that missing chunk of reality is.
It really is. The only reason you aren't constantly aware of it is because your brain essentially photoshops the hole. It looks at the colors and textures around the blind spot and just artificially pastes a matching background over the gap. That's why you don't walk around seeing two floating black orbs in your vision. The software fixes it, but the hardware flaw is undeniably there.
Lents actually uses this incredibly relatable, hilarious story about installing a chair rail in his dining room to explain why evolution let this happen. I love this part because I am famously terrible at home DIY projects.
Oh, it's the perfect metaphor for what economists call the sunk cost fallacy applied to evolution. So he talks about carefully installing this decorative chair rail molding in his house. He measures it, cuts the expensive wood, glues it to the drywall, nails it in place, sands it, stains it, and then a friend comes over to admire the work and gently points out that he installed the entire molding upside down.
Right. The fancy, detailed, carved part was facing the floor instead of the ceiling.
Exactly. And at that terrible moment of realization, what could he realistically do? To actually fix it, he'd have to pry the wood off the wall with a crowbar, which would tear the drywall to shreds, ruin the paint job, and probably splinter and destroy the expensive molding itself. He'd have to demolish the whole room and start completely over. Evolution is stuck in the exact same boat.
So evolution realized the eye was upside down, metaphorically, and just painted over it and said, good enough, let's ship it.
Right. Hundreds of millions of years ago, when the very early vertebrate eye evolved from just a simple flat patch of light-sensitive skin into a curved cup shape, the orientation was set. It just happened purely by chance to fold in a way that put the nerves on the inside facing the light, a 50-50 coin flip. But to flip it around now, to fix the design, would require severing the optic nerve during embryonic development, which would leave the creature completely blind. And a blind animal in the wild dies. Evolution cannot take that massive step backward to make a step forward.
But, and I think this is the absolute kicker here, the thing that completely destroys the argument that it had to be designed this way for some mysterious reason. Not every creature on Earth has this backward eye problem, right? What about the squid?
The cephalopods. Squids, octopuses, cuttlefish. Nature actually invented the complex camera-style eye twice, completely independently of each other. Once for the vertebrate lineage, which became us, and once for the mollusk lineage, which became them. And the cephalopods, they got the coin flip right.
They actually have it wired the correct way.
Yes, they do. In an octopus eye, the photoreceptors face forward, directly toward the incoming light. The nerve wires come out the backside of the retina and plug directly into the brain. They don't block the light at all. And because the nerves are already in the back, they don't need to bundle up and punch a hole through the retina.
So octopuses don't have a blind spot.
Zero blind spot. No light scattering from blood vessels blocking the sensors. From a strict engineering standpoint, the octopus eye is objectively, demonstrably superior to the human eye.
That is deeply humbling. Somewhere deep in the ocean, an octopus is looking at a scuba diver thinking, nice big brain you've got there, real shame about the terrible eye wiring.
It really is humbling. It's physical proof that our design wasn't some inevitable pinnacle of perfection. It was just a random genetic coin flip that went the wrong way 500 million years ago, and we've been compensating for it ever since.
Okay, so moving down from the eyes, let's talk about the face, specifically the sinuses, because I am actually just getting over a pretty nasty cold right now. So this particular design flaw feels like a personal attack. Why exactly is the human head such a terrible mucus trap?
It is an absolute plumbing disaster, and it's mostly caused by a failure to account for gravity. So you have these large, hollow chambers inside your facial bones, the maxillary sinuses, which sit right behind your cheekbones. They are lined with mucus-producing tissue, and the purpose of that mucus is actually great. It traps dust, pollen, and dangerous bacteria from the air you breathe.
Right, a sticky trap. A delightful process, but necessary for health.
Exactly. But once the mucus captures the bad stuff, it needs to be disposed of. It has to drain out of the sinus cavity into the back of your nasal passage, down your throat, so you can swallow it and let your harsh stomach acid destroy the bacteria.
Okay, makes sense. What's the catch?
The catch is the location of the drain. In the human maxillary sinus, the drainage pipe, it's called the ostium, is located at the very, very top of the chamber.
Wait, the drain is at the top. That's literally like putting the drain of a bathtub on the upper rim instead of the floor.
That is the exact perfect analogy. It makes absolutely zero physical sense. So for the mucus to actually drain out of your face, your body has to constantly work against gravity. You have billions of these tiny microscopic hair-like structures called cilia that line the walls of your sinuses. They essentially act like a microscopic bucket brigade, constantly endlessly beating back and forth to push this layer of slime up the vertical wall to reach the drain at the top.
That seems like an incredibly fragile system just destined to fail the second something goes wrong.
It is remarkably fragile. Now, it works reasonably well when you are perfectly healthy and the mucus is thin and watery. The cilia can sweep it up. but the exact moment you catch a cold or get seasonal allergies, your body produces more mucus and it gets thick, heavy, and sticky. The cilia simply get overwhelmed. They physically can't push the heavy sludge up the steep hill.
And so gravity just takes over.
Gravity wins. The heavy mucus slides back down the walls and pools at the bottom of the sinus cavity. It literally becomes a stagnant, dark, warm pond inside your face. The trapped bacteria start to wildly multiply, pressure builds up against the bone, and boom, you have a painful, throbbing sinus infection.
But why on earth would evolution design it that way? Why not just put the drain at the bottom where gravity does the work for free?
Because we totally smashed our faces flat. If you look at the skull of a dog or a horse or a wolf, or even our distant primate ancestors, they have a pronounced snout. Their faces stick out forward. And in a snout, the sinus chambers are positioned horizontally. The fluid just naturally drains down and backward into the throat. Gravity works for them.
But humans needed room for the frontal lobe of the brain.
Exactly right. To fit our massive, expanding frontal cortex, the part of the brain that lets us do calculus, build cities, and host deep dive analysis evolution, essentially took that long snout and smashed it completely flat against the front of the skull. We drastically rearranged the shape of the face, but evolution forgot to reroute the plumbing. The drain hole stayed exactly where it was relative to the bone structure, even though the orientation of the bone completely shifted.
So we basically traded a highly functional, self-draining nose for a really big brain and a lifetime of terrible plumbing.
We prioritized complex thinking over easy breathing, and that's exactly why your dog or your cat rarely gets the kind of miserable, pressure-filled sinus infections that humans suffer from constantly. Their plumbing still obeys gravity.
I will definitely try to remember that next time my head feels like it's going to explode from congestion. Now, the absolute champion of bad biological wiring in this book has to be this one specific nerve Lents focuses on. The recurrent laryngeal nerve. This sounds like the punchline to a joke about a terrible GPS detour.
Oh, this is the absolute poster child for the clumsy, unguided nature of evolution. Honestly, if anyone ever tries to debate you and claims the human body was designed by a flawless grand architect, you just point to this specific nerve. Its job is very simple. It connects the brainstem to the larynx, your voice box. Right. It carries the signals that control your ability to speak, sing, and swallow. Physically, your voice box is located maybe 3 or 4 inches away from the base of your brain.
Right. It's right there in the neck. So logically, it should just be a quick, straight jump, a short wire.
It absolutely should be. But instead, this nerve leaves the brain, travels all the way down your neck, goes deep down into your upper chest cavity, loops completely underneath the aortic arch, which is the massive main artery pumping blood out of your heart, and then travels all the way back up your neck to finally plug into the larynx.
That is ridiculous. That's like driving from New York City to Boston, but taking a mandatory layover in Miami just to turn around.
It is grossly, unbelievably inefficient. And again, to understand why this bizarre detour exists, you can't look at human anatomy. You have to look at deep history. You have to look at fish.
Fish? How does a fish explain my neck nerves?
Because in our ancient fish-like ancestors, there was no neck. The head was attached directly to the torso. The brain, the simple 2-chambered heart, and the gills, which developmentally eventually evolved into the components of our larynx, they were all packed tightly right next to each other. The nerve just went straight across a tiny gap from the brain to the gill arch, and on its short journey, it just happened to pass underneath the blood vessel that eventually evolved into the aorta.
Okay, so back when we were fish, it was an efficient straight line.
Right. But then evolution happened. We slowly crawled out of the water. We became tetrapods. We developed long necks to look around on land. The heart had to migrate deep down into the chest cavity to make room for giant expanding lungs. But the larynx stayed up high in the throat, and that poor nerve, it was already hooked underneath the aorta.
It got physically snagged on the plumbing as the organs drifted apart.
It got completely snagged. And evolution, being a hacker that can't just unplug a vital cord, couldn't cleanly cut the nerve and re-solder it on a more direct path. So as the neck got longer over millions of years, the nerve just had to stretch and stretch and stretch.
And the most extreme, almost comical example of this flaw isn't even found in humans, is it? It's the giraffe.
Oh, the giraffe is an absolute anatomical disaster. Just picture this. In a full-grown giraffe, that exact same nerve leaves the brain, travels all the way down that incredibly long neck into the chest, loops under the heart, and travels all the way back up. That electrical signal has to travel a pointless detour of nearly 15 feet down and 15 feet back up. A 30-foot journey to bridge a gap of a few inches between the brain and the throat.
Wait, does a 30-foot detour actually cause a noticeable delay?
It actually does. Nerve impulses travel very fast, but they aren't completely instantaneous. They have a physical speed limit. There is a measurable physiological delay in the giraffe's ability to vocalize or react with its throat because the signal literally has to take such a ridiculously long trip. Plus, just having a vital, delicate nerve running fully exposed for the entire length of the neck and chest makes it incredibly vulnerable to physical injury. And if you think a giraffe is bad, imagine this in the giant sauropod dinosaurs, the ones with necks the length of a school bus. That nerve detour would have been dozens and dozens of meters long.
It really just perfectly drives home that hacker concept. The code runs, the animal survives. But it is some incredibly ugly spaghetti code.
It's terrible code, but it kept the animal alive long enough to breed, so the code got passed on.
Okay, let's move from the wiring to the physical structure itself. Segment 2, structural glitches. We touched on the throat briefly with the sinuses and the nerves, but the human throat itself is basically a daily death trap, isn't it?
It really is. We are one of the very few species on the planet that can easily, routinely choke to death on our own dinner, and it's because we foolishly use the exact same pipe, the pharynx, for both breathing air and swallowing food.
The shared pipe, which just sounds like a recipe for disaster.
Yes. We are what biologists call tidal breathers. Air goes in through the nose or mouth, travels down the pipe into the lungs, and then the exact same stale air has to reverse course and be pushed back out the exact same pipe. This is already an inefficient design because you always leave a reserve of stale, oxygen-depleted air sitting in the lungs. Birds, by contrast, have evolved a totally different one-way flow-through system. Air goes in one end of the lung system and out the other. It's wildly more efficient at extracting oxygen, which is how they can fly at high altitudes where the air is super thin.
Right, but our big problem isn't just the inefficiency, it's the choking risk.
Exactly. Every single time we swallow a bite of food or a sip of water, we are playing a game of biological roulette. We have a tiny little cartilage flap called the epiglottis that quickly snaps down to try to cover the entrance to the windpipe when we swallow. But it's a mechanical system, and it's not completely foolproof. If you laugh while eating or talk with your mouth full or just time the muscle contractions slightly wrong, that food slips right past the flap and drops straight into your airway. Choking is a leading cause of accidental, preventable death in humans.
And Lent points out in the material that this shared pipe problem actually got significantly worse, specifically because we evolved the ability to talk, right?
Correct. This is a fascinating evolutionary trade-off. To produce the incredibly complex, nuanced range of sounds that human language requires, all the distinct vowels, the sharp consonants, our larynx, our voice box, had to physically migrate up higher in the throat compared to other apes. But by moving up, it severely crunched the physical space available. It made the intersection where the food pipe and the air pipe cross over much tighter, much closer together, and far more dangerous.
So chimpanzees don't have this constant choking problem.
Chimpanzees have their larynx positioned much lower down in the throat. They can actually swallow food and breathe at almost the exact same time, much more safely than we can. But because of that low placement, they simply cannot speak like we do. They physically lack the anatomical setup to make our complex sounds. So evolution essentially decided that the social advantage of being able to communicate and coordinate was worth the constant daily risk of accidentally suffocating on a piece of fruit.
A risk we gladly take every day at lunch. Now, moving down the skeleton, let's talk about the knee. Lents places this firmly in the incomplete adaptation bucket. And I feel this one personally. Anyone who plays sports feels this one. Why is the human knee such a fragile disaster zone?
This is exactly where we see the giant flashing work in progress sign hanging on the human skeleton. It's entirely because of our incredibly rapid evolutionary transition from being quadrupeds to being bipeds. For millions of years, our ancient ancestors were knuckle walkers. They moved horizontally on all fours.
Right, like a chimp or a gorilla traversing the forest floor.
Exactly. And when you are a quadruped, the mechanical physics of the leg are totally different. The knees are permanently bent. The animal's body weight is evenly distributed across 4 separate limbs. And crucially, the massive leg muscles act as shock absorbers, taking the vast majority of the daily physical strain. But then we decided to stand up.
We straighten the legs out.
We straightened them, and we locked the leg bones into a rigid vertical pillar to support our entire upper body weight directly against gravity. And suddenly, the mechanical dynamics completely shifted. Instead of the muscles doing all the heavy lifting, the rigid bones and the tiny connecting ligaments are now taking the massive shearing stress. And the ACL, the anterior cruciate ligament, is the ultimate weak link in this new setup.
That's the ligament every single football or soccer player seems to tear at least once in their career.
It's a tiny, thin little band of tissue. For a knuckle-walking ape, it was perfectly fine. It didn't do much work. But for a bipedal human that weighs 180 pounds, running at top speed, and suddenly planting a foot to twist and change direction on a grassy field, it's woefully, laughably undersized. We are basically asking a thin piece of twine to do the high-tension job of a braided steel cable.
So the ACL snaps purely because it just wasn't structurally designed for the job we suddenly gave it.
It's a total mechanical mismatch. We are trying to use a simple hinge joint that evolved for low-impact walking on all fours to perform high-impact weight-bearing pivoting on two legs. Honestly, considering the physics involved, it's amazing our knees work as well as they do.
Speaking of evolutionary mismatches and physical clutter, the human skeleton really seems to have some deep-seated hoarding issues. I want to talk about what Lentz calls the pointless bones.
Oh, the bones. Yeah, evolution is the ultimate hoarder. It absolutely hates throwing anything away, even if it's useless. And the wrist is a perfect, messy example of this.
Because it's not just one bone causing problems there, is it?
No, it's a gravel pit. We have 8 separate, totally distinct, pebble-like carpal bones crammed into the wrist, plus the 2 long arm bones meeting them, plus the hand bones extending out. It is a chaotic cluster of little rocks. It's evolutionary clutter. It provides no real mechanical advantage. In fact, having so many tiny bones actually limits our flexibility and makes the wrist incredibly weak and prone to sprains and fractures.
But why do we have exactly 8 of them if they're so useless?
Simply because our distant reptilian and amphibian ancestors had highly complex, multi-jointed limbs designed for entirely different types of movement, like crawling over uneven rocks or swimming with paddles. As we evolved hands for grasping, we didn't need all those tiny hinge points. But evolution just kept the bones there, fusing some, letting others just sit loose. Genetically speaking, it's actually much harder and takes much longer to completely delete a bone from the DNA blueprint than to just let it sit there doing nothing.
And I guess the most famous, undeniably useless bone of all has to be the tailbone, the cossygonex.
A true classic vestigial structure. We don't have tails. We haven't had visible tails for millions of years. And yet we all still have these fused, curled up vertebrae hiding at the very base of the spine. And what's even weirder, what most people don't know, is that we still have the muscle physically attached to it.
Wait, a muscle? We have a tail muscle.
We do. It's called the dorsal sacrococcygeal muscle. It's still there, attached to the tailbone. Now, in a dog or a cat, this exact same muscle is what powerfully wags their tail back and forth. But in humans, it's just sitting there underneath the skin, occasionally twitching, desperately trying to wag a tail that simply doesn't exist anymore.
That is such a vivid, slightly creepy image. We're literally walking around with ghost tails.
It actually gets spookier than that. When we are early embryos developing inside the womb, right around 4 weeks into gestation, we actually grow a very real, very visible tail. It's right there on the ultrasound. But then, as development continues, a specific genetic signal fires, triggering a process called apoptosis-programmed cell death. The tail basically dissolves and is absorbed by the body before we are born, but the ancient blueprint to build it is still fully intact in our DNA.
Does that genetic signal ever fail to fire? Do people ever keep the tail?
It absolutely does fail sometimes. There are highly documented medical cases of human babies being born with small, fleshy vestigial tails. It's rare, but it happens entirely because that delete signal just mutated or didn't trigger properly in the room. It really dramatically highlights that we carry our deep evolutionary history with us in every cell. We are not a clean, blank slate.
Okay, so we've got backward wired eyes, incredibly dangerous throats, terrible knees, and twitching ghost tails. Let's shift gears and move to segment 3. The hungry and broken machine. This part of the deep dive really surprised me because I always hear about how remarkably adaptable human beings are when it comes to diet. We can live anywhere and eat anything. But Lentz says our bodies are actually incredibly needy and pathetic.
We are metabolically lazy. That is truly the best way to summarize the human digestive system. I mean, just compare us to a cow for a second. A cow eats grass. That's essentially its entire diet. But from that simple, boring grass, the cow's internal organs manufacture every single complex protein, every vitamin, and every fat molecule it needs to survive and build a 1,000-pound body. Its liver is a miraculous, self-sustaining chemical factory.
And humans, how do we compare?
We are pathetic by comparison. If a human being doesn't constantly consume a highly specific, vastly complex pyramid of external nutrients, we're talking vitamin C, vitamin B12, iron, iodine, calcium, and a whole list of essential amino acids that we literally cannot synthesize, Our bodies just rapidly break down and fall apart. We die.
But why did we lose the ability to make this stuff internally? Why be so dependent?
It comes down to an evolutionary rule of thumb. Use it or lose it. Let's take vitamin C as the perfect example. Most mammals on Earth, dogs, cats, cows, mice, they all naturally synthesize their own vitamin C internally. A dog will never, ever get scurvy. But if you look at our ancient ancestors, the early primates, they lived deep in tropical jungles. They were surrounded by a constant year-round buffet of fresh fruit. They were naturally eating massive, excessive amounts of vitamin C every single day.
So the body basically realized, why am I wasting energy making this when I'm eating so much of it?
Exactly. Manufacturing vitamin C internally costs precious cellular energy. Now, all mammals have a specific gene. It's called the GULO gene, and its only job is to produce the specific enzyme required to synthesize vitamin C. About 60 million years ago, a completely random genetic mutation occurred in one of our early primate ancestors, and it broke that GULO gene.
This is the spark-slug analogy from the text, right?
Lents brilliantly compares this broken gene to a car engine. The engine itself is still sitting there under the hood. The vast majority of the GULO gene sequence still physically exists inside our human DNA today. We can map it, we can see it, but the spark plug, just a tiny crucial section of the genetic code, was randomly deleted. So the engine is there, but the car simply won't start. It produces nothing.
And normally in the wild, a mutation that breaks a vital vitamin factory would be instantly fatal, right? That animal would die and the mutation wouldn't be passed on.
It absolutely would be fatal in almost any other context. But because that specific ancestor was gorging on vitamin-rich fruit all day long anyway, the broken internal factory didn't matter. They didn't get sick, they survived, they reproduced, and they passed that broken, mutated gene down to their kids, who passed it to their kids. And we just carried that broken machinery for tens of millions of years. Until humans suddenly started building wooden ships and sailing across vast, empty oceans.
Where there was no fruit for months at a time. And suddenly, that ancient, broken GULO gene mattered a whole lot.
And the result was scurvy. Scurvy is one of the most horrific, agonizing diseases imaginable. The connective tissues holding your body together literally begin to dissolve because you lack the vitamin C needed to synthesize collagen. Old wounds spontaneously reopen, teeth fall out of your skull. Their bodies fall apart entirely because a genetic factory had broken 60 million years prior. We are tethered to our external environment in a way that many other animals just aren't.
This perfectly leads us right into the architecture of the genome itself. You mentioned that the broken GULO gene is still just sitting there in our cells. This brings up the whole concept of junk DNA. I've heard this term tossed around a lot, but I honestly thought maybe it was an outdated concept.
There was definitely a scientific debate about it for a while, with some researchers hoping we'd find hidden functions for all of it, but Lents is pretty firm on the modern consensus. The vast, overwhelming majority of human DNA, we're talking about roughly 97% of it, does not actually code for any proteins at all. It's not genes in the traditional sense that build bodies or enzymes. Sure, a small fraction of that non-coding DNA regulates when the active genes turn on and off, but a truly massive amount of it is just absolute gibberish.
Gibberish. Like completely meaningless.
It's like picking up a 1,000-page book where 970 pages are just random letters mashed on a keyboard by a monkey, and the actual story you want to read is scattered in a few hidden sentences buried in the noise.
And some of that gibberish, and this was the part of the book that honestly creeped me out the most, some of it is actually composed of dead viruses.
The viral graveyards, yes. This is, without a doubt, one of the most unsettling biological facts you will ever learn. Roughly 8% of your entire human genome, which, by the way, is more total DNA than the actual functional genes that make you human, is entirely made up of the decaying, mutated carcasses of ancient retroviruses.
Wait, I need to make sure I understand this. You are saying I am physically 8% virus.
You are. So a retrovirus, like HIV, for example, works by physically injecting its own viral genetic code directly into the host cell's DNA, hijacking the cell to print more viruses. Millions of years ago, these ancient retroviruses infected our ancestors. They inserted their code. But occasionally, the virus would get trapped. It would suffer a mutation inside the host DNA and break, losing its ability to activate. It died. But the physical code remained spliced into the DNA strand. And so every single time your cells divide, your body is dutifully, blindly copying the dead corpses of these millions of years old viruses.
That seems like an unbelievable waste of biological energy.
It is a staggering waste. It's exactly like keeping thousands of spam emails from 1998 in your inbox and paying to print them all out on paper every single day, just in case. It serves zero purpose.
And then, as if dead viruses aren't bad enough, there's the jumpy DNA, the ALU elements.
Right, the ALU elements. This is even more chaotic. An ALU element behaves very much like a malicious computer virus or a genetic parasite hiding inside our own genome. It doesn't code for anything useful to the body. Its one and only biological goal is to blindly copy itself. It's essentially a rogue copy-paste command in a Word document. It copies its sequence and pastes itself somewhere else randomly in the DNA strand.
It just physically jumps around your chromosomes.
Yes, it duplicates and inserts. We currently have over 1 million individual copies of this specific ALU element just cluttering up our genome. It alone makes up about 10% of all human DNA. And it's not just harmless, passive clutter, it's actively dangerous. Because it jumps randomly, if an ALU element copies itself and happens to land smack in the middle of a vital working gene, it breaks that gene entirely. This exact mechanism is a known, documented cause of devastating diseases like hemophilia and several types of severe cancers. It's a genetic parasite, and we have absolutely no way to get rid of it.
It's honestly a miracle we manage to function at all, with all this garbage code inside us. And speaking of functioning, let's talk about how we function or fail to function in the modern world. Obesity. This is obviously a massively complex topic with a lot of factors, but Lents squarely frames our modern struggle with weight as a fundamental wrong environment flaw.
It is the ultimate textbook evolutionary mismatch. You have to remember, for 99.9% of human history, starvation was the primary threat to survival. Getting enough calories was a daily, desperate struggle. Pure sugars and dense fats were incredibly rare treasures in nature. So if a hunter-gatherer stumbled upon a fruiting fig tree or a beehive full of honeycomb, the absolute most successful survival strategy was to eat as much of it as physically possible, right then and there.
Right, because you literally had no idea if you'd find food tomorrow or the next week. You had to stock up.
Exactly. And the human body evolved to become spectacularly efficient at storing any and all excess energy as dense fat tissue. It was a brilliant, necessary survival mechanism. It kept us alive through harsh winters and famines. But now, look around. We live in a widely unnatural world of infinite, instantly accessible calories. We are walking around with ancient Stone Age bodies desperately trying to navigate a neon-lit fast food world.
So our bodies are essentially existing in a state of permanent panic about a starvation event that is never going to come.
That's precisely it. Our so-called thrifty genes are still absolutely terrified of winter. They flood our brains with dopamine to drive us to eat the donut because our deep biology thinks that donut might literally be the last surge of calories we encounter for a month. And once we eat it, our biology fiercely hoards the fat, refusing to burn it. Evolution moves incredibly slowly. It simply hasn't had the time to adapt to agriculture, let alone industrial food processing. It hasn't caught up to say, okay, relax, we have plenty of food now, you can stop storing fat.
So honestly, when I crave a whole pizza at midnight, it's not just a personal failure of willpower, it's millions of years of my ancestors screaming at me to survive the Pleistocene winter.
It is a profound evolutionary lag. You are consciously trying to fight against millions of years of hardwired survival programming, and usually the programming wins.
That is extremely validating to hear, frankly. Okay, let's move into segment 4, Homo sterilis. This chapter was truly shocking to me. I mean, look at the population. There are over 8 billion human beings on the planet right now, so logically we must be incredibly good at reproduction, right? But Lents argues we are actually catastrophically terrible at it compared to almost every other animal.
We clearly succeed through sheer volume and persistence. We are quantity over quality in that regard, but physiologically, down at the cellular and anatomical level, human reproduction is a disaster zone. I mean, just compare us to a cat or a rabbit. If you put 2 healthy, fertile cats together in a room, you're going to get a litter of kittens. It works almost 100% of the time with very little physical drama.
Right, they breed like rabbits. It's effortless.
But humans, the statistics are incredibly grim. Even for a perfectly healthy young human couple actively trying to conceive at the optimal time, the chance of a successful conception in any given single month is only about 20%. And even if conception miraculously happens, the failure rate after the fact is just staggering.
The statistics on miscarriages in this book were incredibly heavy, really sobering to read.
They are deeply sobering. Lents points out that researchers estimate up to 85% of all human conceptions ultimately result in miscarriage. Now, the vast majority of these happen so early, within the first few days or weeks, that the woman never even realizes she was technically pregnant. The body just flushes it. We call it spontaneous abortion. And the primary reason for this massive failure rate is almost always chromosomal abnormalities.
the copying process feeling again, just bad cellular manufacturing.
Exactly right. Our human cells are surprisingly, bizarrely bad at meiosis, which is the specific cellular division process of making sperm and egg cells. We make constant, routine mistakes in counting and dividing the chromosomes. An egg ends up with an extra chromosome, or a sperm is missing one. When they combine, the resulting embryo's genetic code is fatally corrupted. The mother's body detects the critical error and automatically terminates the pregnancy. We are literally throwing away the vast majority of our potential offspring purely because of sloppy microscopic manufacturing.
And the incredible irony is, if the baby does somehow survive the genetic gauntlet and make it to full term, physically getting it out of the body is a whole new nightmare. The book calls this the big head problem.
Yes, the obstetrical dilemma. This is a fascinating case where two completely different, highly advantageous evolutionary trends collided head-on with catastrophic results for mothers. On one hand, over the last few million years, we evolved massive, swollen brains, which are great for survival. On the other hand, we evolved to walk upright on two legs, which biomechanically requires a narrow, rigid pelvis for efficient walking and running.
So you have a giant bowling ball head trying to fit through a narrow, rigid bipedal pelvis.
It's a geometric nightmare. In almost all other mammals, giving birth is not a major, life-threatening medical event. A female gorilla will literally give birth in the jungle and basically just go right back to eating leaves 10 minutes later. The baby just slips out. But for humans, the baby's massive skull has to physically twist, rotate, and compress just to navigate the labyrinth of the birth canal. It's an incredibly tight, agonizing squeeze. Historically, before modern medicine and surgery, childbirth was a leading cause of horrific death for young human women.
And this structural bottleneck directly leads to why human babies are so incredibly useless when they're born, doesn't it? I mean, a baby horse drops out of the mother and is literally up and running in a field within 20 minutes. A human baby at 6 months can't even consistently hold its own head up.
Lents refers to this helpless phase as the fourth trimester. Because of this critical head size versus pelvis size issue, human babies have to be evicted from the womb prematurely compared to the developmental schedules of other primates. If a human fetus stayed in the womb until its brain and body were as physically developed and capable as a newborn chimp, its head would be far too massive to ever fit through the birth canal. Both mother and baby would die. So, to compromise, we are born half-baked. Our brains are incredibly underdeveloped at birth, leaving us completely helpless and dependent for months and years.
Which in turn completely changes our entire social structure as a species.
Oh, totally. Because the human infant is so profoundly helpless, it requires an immense, constant amount of parental investment just to keep it alive. We literally need a tribe, a village, to raise a child, because a single mother couldn't possibly provide enough constant care and gather food simultaneously in the wild.
It's amazing how it's all connected. The big brain causes the narrow hips, which causes the painful birth, which causes the helpless baby, which creates human society. And then there's the other end of the reproductive timeline, which also feels unique: menopause.
This is a true biological oddity. Almost no other animal on Earth does this. In the vast majority of species, females continue to reproduce until the day they die. Humans, along with a few species of toothed whales like killer whales, are the stark exceptions to the rule. Female humans live for decades past their reproductive viability.
From a purely Darwinian perspective, why stop? Doesn't evolution want you to make as many copies of yourself as possible?
It seems counterintuitive until you consider the grandmother hypothesis. Remember, childbirth is uniquely dangerous for humans, and that danger drastically increases as a woman ages. Furthermore, human babies are uniquely helpless and require years of intense care. So, mathematically, it actually made more evolutionary sense for an older woman to completely stop having her own risky pregnancies.
To protect herself so she can invest time in her existing family, the grandkids.
Exactly. By stopping reproduction, a grandmother survives to help gather food, teach complex skills, and protect her existing children and grandchildren. Because those grandchildren carry 25% of her genes, by ensuring their survival in a harsh world, she actually propagates her own genetic legacy far more effectively than if she selfishly tried to have one more baby at age 50, died in childbirth, and left an infant to starve.
That's actually a really beautiful, profound social adaptation born directly out of a terrifying physical limitation. Okay, we are moving into segment 5. We've thoroughly critiqued the body, the diet, and reproduction. Let's talk about why we get sick and mental glitches. Let's start with the immune system.
Right, so we seem to have this tragic civil war constantly raging inside our bodies. I'm talking about autoimmune diseases, things like lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, multiple sclerosis, Crohn's disease. These are horrific conditions where the body's immune system stops fighting outside invaders and starts viciously attacking its own healthy tissue.
Why would a survival system ever do that? Why attack the self?
The leading explanation is the hygiene hypothesis. You have to remember the context of our evolution. Our immune system evolved in a brutally filthy, parasite-ridden world. For millions of years, our bodies were constantly, endlessly fighting off severe infections from tapeworms, flesh-eating bacteria, and dangerous microbes. Because the threat was so high, our internal army was heavily armed and trained to be hyper-aggressive just to keep us alive.
But now, in the modern world, we drink filtered water, we cook our meat, we use hand sanitizer.
Right. Over just the last 100 years, we suddenly killed almost all the major parasites. We sanitized our environment. But that hyper-aggressive internal army, it's still mobilized, it's sitting there, heavily armed, and it's completely bored. It has no massive external enemy to fight anymore, so it gets restless and starts looking for any trouble it can find. Sometimes it misidentifies our own joint cartilage or the myelin sheath around our nerves as a dangerous invader, and it launches a full-scale attack. It's essentially a massive standing army causing a violent riot in the barracks because there's no actual war to fight.
That is a brilliant, terrifying analogy. And finally, we have to talk about the brain, our crowning glory, the thing that supposedly makes us superior. But Lents dedicates a whole chapter to showing that our mind is basically a species of suckers.
Oh, absolutely. This part is fun, but it's also deeply unnerving. Because we blindly trust our brains. We think our memory, for instance, operates like a digital video recording. You experience an event, you hit record, and when you recall it later, you are just playing back an accurate, unchangeable file from a hard drive.
But the science says it's not like that at all.
It is entirely not like that. Memory is not a recording, it is an active reconstruction. Every single time you remember a past event, you are literally pulling the memory apart, looking at it, and rewriting it as you put it back into storage. You can easily, completely subconsciously change fundamental details. The color of a car, who said what, even how you felt, and the next time you remember it, you will swear on your life that this newly edited version is the absolute objective truth.
So we are just constantly, endlessly gaslighting ourselves without even knowing it.
We absolutely are. And the glitches extend to logic, too. We are notoriously terrible at statistics and probability. Take the gambler's fallacy.
Oh, explain that one for the listeners. This happens in casinos all the time.
Right, so imagine you are flipping a completely fair coin. If it flips heads 10 times in a row, the human brain feels deep in its bones that tails is somehow due to happen on the next flip. We feel certain the universe owes us a tails to balance things out. But the coin is an inanimate object. It has no memory of the past 10 flips. The mathematical odds of the next flip are exactly the same as the first, 50-50.
So why does our brain instinctively feel so strongly that tails is coming? Why do we think that way?
Because in nature, in the wild environment where our brains evolved, things do follow predictable sequential patterns. If you find ripe fruit on a bush today, there will probably be ripe fruit there tomorrow. If it rained heavily yesterday, the ground is likely wet today. Our brains evolved to be hyperactive, pattern-seeking machines. We are so desperate to find patterns that we often project them onto totally random events where they don't actually exist. Evolutionarily speaking, it's much safer to see a pattern that isn't really there, like mistaking the random rustle of wind in the grass for a stalking lion, than to ignore a pattern and get eaten.
And that deeply ingrained pattern-seeking behavior ties right into confirmation bias too, doesn't it? We just see the patterns we already want to see.
Yes. Lentz calls it motivated skepticism. Our brains are incredibly lazy. We readily, happily accept any new information that comfortably fits into our pre-existing beliefs without questioning it at all. But if we encounter information that contradicts our worldview, we suddenly become hypercritical, aggressively scrutinizing it to find any excuse to reject it. In an ancient tribe, this shared delusion was useful for group cohesion and loyalty. But today, in the modern age of the internet and infinite information, it just creates massive, impenetrable bubbles of polarization.
Before we wrap up, I have one last quick question on brain glitches that I found fascinating. Why do young human males specifically do such incredibly stupid, reckless things like jumping off roofs or driving cars at absurd speeds? Is that a broken glitch or is there a reason for it?
Believe it or not, Lentz argues it's actually an evolutionary feature. based on something called the handicap principle. It's essentially genetic peacocking. Think about a male peacock. It grows this massive, heavy, brightly colored tail that makes it incredibly easy for predators to see and catch him. Why would evolution encourage that?
To show off to the females.
Exactly. The peacock is visually saying to the female, look at how incredibly strong, fast, and genetically fit I am. I am so fit that I can survive in this dangerous jungle despite carrying this ridiculous, heavy handicap. Humans do the same thing. When a young man drives a car at 100 miles an hour down a winding road or attempts a highly dangerous physical stunt, he is subconsciously signaling to potential mates, I possess such incredibly good reflexes and such superior genetic fitness that I can take this massive, unnecessary risk and still survive.
So it's essentially an ancient hormonal mating dance disguised as a death wish.
That is basically it. It's incredibly stupid and destructive in the modern world of fast cars and concrete, but it's driven by very deep, very old evolutionary code.
Wow. So looking back at everything we've covered in this deep dive, the backward wired eyes, the totally broken vitamin genes, the treacherous choking throat, the self-deceiving brain, it really paints a very clear picture of humanity as a jack of all trades, master of none.
That is the ultimate upshot of Lents' argument. We aren't the fastest runners. We aren't the strongest fighters. We don't have the sharpest eyes or the keenest sense of smell. Biologically, we are generalists. We are just good enough at a wide variety of things to barely survive. But what truly makes the human species special isn't our physical perfection at all.
It's the fact that we use our big, messy brains to fix the physical glitches.
Exactly. That is our true superpower. We evolved with terrible, degrading eyesight. Fine, we invented the science of optics and created glasses and contact lenses. We have a dangerously narrow pelvis that makes childbirth lethal. We developed medical science, sterile surgery, and C-sections. We have a broken GLO gene that causes scurvy. We figured out chemistry and put synthesized vitamin C into a cheap daily pill. We continually use our cumulative culture, our science, and our technology to artificially patch the glaring holes in our biology.
So we are essentially stepping outside of natural selection and taking charge of our own evolution.
We are. We are rapidly moving away from slow, blind, biological evolution, which relies on random mutations over millions of years. And we have entered an era of cultural and technological evolution, which is blindingly fast and intentional. We are already fixing these ancient glitches with medicine. Eventually, we might fix them permanently with targeted gene editing. Or we might just build better, more durable robotic machines to support our frail biological bodies.
So we truly are beautifully imperfect, and all these bizarre anatomical scars and genetic broken parts just tell the epic, chaotic story of exactly how we got here.
They absolutely do. Every single physical flaw, every aching knee and stuffy nose is a deep history lesson. It's a permanent reminder that we are not above nature. We are just a messy, improvised part of the animal kingdom, doing our absolute best to keep the machine running.
That is a fantastic, deeply thought-provoking place to leave it. A huge thank you to the insights from Nathan Lents and his incredible book, Human Errors, for providing the material for this deep dive. It truly, fundamentally changes how you look at yourself in the mirror every morning.
It certainly does. It mostly just makes you deeply appreciate the fact that you managed to wake up and function at all.
Thank you for watching. Please like it, share, subscribe, follow up, and next topic.